When we trust kids to use their imaginations, to wonder about the questions that interest them, and to come up with their own ways to play, we're giving them space to become creative, industrious, self-motivated individuals. We're giving them space to figure out who they are, to figure out what delights them, what bothers them, what moves them.
Happy Friday. I'm Michael Kovnat. This is the Next Big Idea Daily. Quick life lessons from the best new nonfiction. Now, won't you be my neighbor? Please, won't you be my neighbor? With these simple questions, Fred Rogers invited millions of children into Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, a kids show that has since become a spiritual touchstone for people of all ages. In their 2021 book, When You Wonder, You're Learning, Mr. Rogers' Enduring Lessons for Raising Creative, Curious, Caring Kids, writers Ryan Rudetsky and Greg Bear distilled Mr. Rogers' lessons into a parenting manual, offering techniques we can use to raise happier, more humane children. Here they are with the big ideas from their book.
This is Ryan Rudetsky, and I'm a science and education reporter.
And I'm Greg Bear, Executive Director of the Grable Foundation and founder of Remake Learning. Together, we're the authors of When You Wonder, You're Learning, Mr. Rogers' Enduring Lessons for Raising Creative, Curious, Caring Kids. The book uncovers the science behind Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, exploring how kids, and their parents too, can excel at what Rogers taught best, being human.
We're going to share with you 5 big ideas from our book. When it comes to children's learning, the presence of caring adults outweighs almost everything else. If there was one idea at the core of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, this was it. In 1969, when Fred Rogers was trying to save the Corporation for Public Broadcasting from being defunded, he testified to the Senate that above all, he felt that his job on television was to give an expression of care every day to each child. And on one hand, that sounds obvious, right? Of course kids need caring adults around them. But what's interesting about Mr. Rogers, and this is really the crux of our book, is that decades after the neighborhood debuted, science is just now starting to catch up with it. We're starting to learn in a very real, quantifiable way just how right Rogers was and just how effective his philosophies and his methods really are. Let's take just one out of countless examples of this. In the 1980s, researchers at the University of Washington launched a long-term study of about 800 kids, which they divided into groups. The researchers gave the parents and teachers of one group a series of lessons and tools designed to help adults build stronger relationships with kids. The parents and teachers of the rest were the control group, meaning they didn't receive any extra help at all. 30 years later, in 2019, the researchers compared the two groups. And just as Mr. Rogers might have predicted, the kids whose parents and teachers had been taught to build stronger relationships outperformed their peers on everything. They were happier. They made more money. They were more healthy physically. They were more likely to be involved in their communities. And this held true across race, gender, and class. The researchers summed up their findings with a surprisingly simple statement. The most important thing we learned, they wrote, was just the value of being present. Make sure your kids have the opportunity to engage with you as a parent. Play with them. Hold them. Don't just sit on your phone when you're with them, and you're likely to be setting them up to have better lives long into the future.
Great learning requires a sense of safety that's both physical and psychological. It's a fact of human biology that we just don't think very well when we feel like we're in danger. When we're faced with a threat, whether it's one of physical harm or rejection from a group of our peers, our stress response systems take over. And the resources that normally power our cognition, things like curiosity, complex thinking, and even compassion, are routed instead to our bodies, getting us ready to fight, or to flee, or to freeze. So if we want our children to learn, it's up to adults to help minimize the threats that trigger those stress responses. Now, that doesn't mean lying to kids, or avoiding conflict, or ignoring the distressing realities of the world. Kids have to learn to handle that stuff, and with your help, they absolutely can. But it does mean that it's our job to help kids feel safe. If you were to watch the first episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which aired in 1968, and then watch the last episode, which aired in 2001, you really wouldn't notice a lot of differences. Yes, one is black and white, and the other is color, And yes, Rogers himself has aged 30-some years. But the set is largely the same. The songs are largely the same. And the structure is largely the same. Almost every episode starts with Rogers talking to us in his living room. Then we go off to the neighborhood of make-believe for a while, and then we come back to Mr. Rogers to talk about what we've seen. Consider the changes that took place outside of that TV studio over the course of 3 decades. It's remarkable how consistent Rogers kept things for the camera. And that was deliberate. He knew that consistent routines and structures help kids feel safe. He knew that by maintaining this trustworthy TV world, he was helping kids feel relaxed enough to be able to learn. Even his trademark hellos, the changing of his shoes, the zipping of his sweaters, conveyed a sense of welcoming and warmth. And so, to the extent that he could, Rogers created a world that didn't ignore outside threats, but that made kids feel safe from them, if only for 28 minutes. And then, of course, there were his songs, all of which he wrote to help kids feel that they are enough, that they are worthy of acceptance right now, exactly as they are, regardless of what they know or don't know, regardless of what they look like, regardless of their individual strengths and faults. And there's so much science now showing that this feeling of psychological safety is absolutely essential to learning and to how kids, and adults too, function in relation to one another. Google did a study of its own teams a few years ago. The company's statisticians found that teams that lacked psychological safety, where people were made to feel inadequate or unworthy, missed their sales goals by an average of 19%. And the teams that felt psychological safety exceeded their goals by almost the same amount, because members were so readily able to learn, both as individuals and as a unit.
Environment shapes behavior. This is another truth of learning that Rogers seemed to get on a fundamental level, in which he deployed in some really ingenious ways. If you think about learning spaces today, in lots of them you'll find some amazing technology. You'll hopefully find at least one caring adult, and you'll probably see the things that we typically associate with learning, things like books, desks, a chalkboard or a smartboard, and so on. But in the United States, we haven't always given a lot of thought to, or placed a lot of value on, physical spaces. Things like what the lighting does, how the furniture feels, which materials things are made of. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, not least of which is the amount of resources we allocate for these things. But Mr. Rogers knew that this stuff matters, and the learning sciences are once again proving him right. One of the tools for learning that we discuss in the book is creativity, and we know so much more now about how our physical surroundings can support or detract from our creative output. There was a study done in 2002, for example, where researchers gauged the creativity of high school students in different settings, including the sort of sterile, plastic and drywall rooms that we typically associate with traditional classrooms. And what they found was that students were far more creative in spaces with lots of materials like wood and sunlight, places where things look natural and well-crafted, places that look, in other words, a lot like Mr. Rogers' living room. Today, places that prioritize physical environments like Rogers did are seeing some really amazing results. One of the examples we profile in the book is the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild, which is a community arts center based here in Pittsburgh that operates campuses around the world. Here, they serve kids from some of Pittsburgh's lowest income neighborhoods, recruiting world-class educators to teach photography, ceramics, digital arts, and more. All of this happens in this incredible building. The Guild's founder, Bill Strickland, is an artist himself, and he hired a student of Frank Lloyd Wright to design the center. There's glass and wood and sunlight everywhere. There's art on every wall. There are orchids. When we visited, Bill said something we'll never forget. He said, "Everywhere you look here, there's something beautiful looking back. That is deliberate. Environments like this one erase fear. They cure cancer of the human spirit, and the kids inside them blossom." And Bill Strickland's right. 98% of the Guild's kids graduate from high school on time. 85% go on to some kind of secondary education. They've never had an incident of violence, and they've never called the police. There's never been a need. Environment shapes behavior.
The things adults value and the things kids think we value don't always match up. If there's one thing that set Fred Rogers apart from your average caring adult, it was the intentionality and the thoughtfulness with which he communicated with kids. Talking to young people is something that feels intuitive to a lot of adults. But as one psychologist once wrote, conversing with kids is a unique art, one with rules and meanings of its own. Rogers understood this in ways that can be really helpful to parents and teachers today. We'll give you an example of one of the gulfs between what adults say and what kids actually hear. When adults are asked about their highest hopes for their children, the vast majority of parents and teachers agree. The most important thing they say is that kids grow up to be caring adults who prioritize family, generosity, and community. Nearly every adult says that. On surveys at least, our values are clear. We think that caring about others is way more important than what grades kids get or what awards they win. What kids hear, though, is a completely different story. According to Harvard's Graduate School of Education, about 80% of young people say the opposite, that their parents and teachers are more concerned about grades and achievement than anything else. Even adults' unconscious cues can filter down to kids. Parents are more likely to Google whether their sons are geniuses than their daughters. And teachers are more likely to perceive boys as having innate talent, even though girls tend to do better in school. One of the remarkable things about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is that no one walked away from it wondering how Fred Rogers saw them. In every episode, his message to kids was clear. I see your potential and your worth exactly as you are. You are loved and capable of loving. And if you can come to see that in yourself and in the people around you, then you'll have what you need to succeed, regardless of what success might look like for you. So what can we learn from the man in the cardigan sweater? It all comes down to how we listen and how we talk. Effective communication with kids, or really with anyone, does one particular thing. It acknowledges and respects the other person's feelings, even if we don't agree with those feelings. Now that's easier said than done. Kids, like all human beings, can be downright baffling. But when we make space to listen to kids without judging them, and without projecting our assumptions, our experiences, or even our well-intentioned words of wisdom, we start to do what Rogers did, which is see children as people whose feelings and hopes and fears are every bit as deep and real as our own. And when we talk to people from this place of understanding, they become more receptive to hearing us, and vice versa. We can have real conversations that bring us closer together and close those unintended gulfs. The Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh calls this deep listening and loving speech, which is a phrase that's also a just about perfect description of the neighborhood.
Unstructured time is not necessarily wasted time. When you go back and watch Mr. Rogers as an adult, one of the first things you'll notice is the sheer amount of silence he deploys. There's a stillness to the neighborhood that you generally don't find in other television programs. In fact, while TV and movies today include a cut every 2 to 3 seconds on average, Rogers allowed no more than 2 cuts per minute in the neighborhood, and so the program moves much more slowly. There's a lot of unfilled space. Like everything else Rogers did, this was by design. His program embraced a fact that we've really come to ignore in this always-on, hyper-connected world we've built, which is this. For all our emphasis on speed and instantaneous access, our best ideas and our purest inspiration come in moments of quiet, in moments of solitude. We do our best thinking and learning not when we're barraged by fast-moving media or by the internet's buzzing hive mind, but when we're disconnected, when we're unplugged and alone. And even, or perhaps especially, when we're bored. In recent years, there's been an explosion of interest in this idea among scientists, writers, and even workplace experts who are trying to help people focus during a time of constant distraction. But when it comes to kids and learning, there's a sort of cultural pressure to fill every moment with something productive. And so it's no wonder that unstructured free time is disappearing from families' schedules. The perceived risks of sitting still are huge. And even when we do relax, we have this unlimited menu of things to watch and posts to read and songs to listen to, thanks to these devices in our pockets. Try to remember the last time you just sat still. No screens, no media, no cognitive input from somebody else's brain. For most of us, it's probably been a while. The irony is that this relentless focus on productivity is in many ways counterproductive. Rogers knew this, and that's why you see scenes in the neighborhood like an egg timer counting down a full minute. Or like Rogers turning a houseplant ever so slightly, again and again, so that kids can see it from every possible angle. There's even an episode that finds Rogers literally watching paint dry. The point of all this was twofold. The first was to give kids space to think and to process. And the second was just to trust them. Rogers knew that when we let them, kids can and will fill periods of downtime with their own curiosity and their own creativity. Rogers knew that kids need that downtime in order to feel wonder and to develop interests that are authentic to them rather than imposed on them by adults. And the benefits are enormous. When we trust kids to use their imaginations, to wonder about the questions that interest them, and to come up with their own ways to play, we're giving them space to become creative, industrious, self-motivated individuals. We're giving them space to figure out who they are, to figure out what delights them, what bothers them, what moves them. Now, this doesn't mean that we, the adults, don't get involved. Just the opposite. Psychologists have found that it helps when adults encourage and even join in children's play, and when they provide simple objects like building blocks that, to a kid, can become anything. This is so important that in 2018, the American Academy of Pediatrics released a prescription for the nation's parents. Go play with your kids, they said, every single day. We've known it for a long time, but those pediatricians made it official. The lessons we learned in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood are just what the doctor ordered.
Thank you, Ryan and Greg. Okay, listeners, you can get yourself a copy of When You Wonder You're Learning using the link in the episode notes. If you got something out of today's show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a glowing review to help others find it. That does it for us this week. These episodes were written by me, Michael Kovnat, and edited by Caleb Bissinger. We'll see you Monday.